Welcome back to another episode of Wise Words Book Summaries. Today we're continuing on with the theme of communication, and we're going to be doing Storyworthy by Matthew Dix. So Matthew Dix is an author, storyteller, and teacher, best known for his internationally best-selling novels that have been translated into over 25 languages worldwide. His novel, Memoirs of an Imaginary Friend, won the 2014 Dolly Gray Award and was a finalist for the 2017 Nutmeg Award in Connecticut. As a storyteller, Matthew Dix stands out with a record 56 Moth Story Slam victories and 9 Grand Slam championships, showcasing his unparalleled talent in storytelling on platforms like the Moth Radio Hour, PBS's Stories from the Stage, and numerous other podcasts. When not writing or storytelling, Dix dedicates his time to teaching, having been recognized as the West Hartford Teacher of the Year and finalist for Connecticut Teacher of the Year. So he's an author, a teacher, and an award-winning storyteller. So the perfect trio almost for writing a book about this.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's pretty accomplished. Yeah, I mean, it's nice because we've kind of touched on stories a lot in a bunch of books, and it's nice to be able to kind of dive deep into this one and really explore it.
Yeah, so before we start, I just wanted to talk about the fact that this book is probably super necessary at the moment, because in the last couple of books we reviewed, such as Think Smarter, Talk Faster, I think it's that name again, always mess that up, and the Better Small Talk, they both talked about keeping a stockpile of stories behind your belt to whip out in conversation, etc. And this book is specifically around finding those stories in your own life and sort of crafting them almost, right? So this is about creating that stockpile. So I thought it was a nice little detour in, because I guess it's not strictly communication, it's more storytelling, but I think it's a nice segue relating to both the books that we just covered. So
yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, stories are such an important component of communication. We all know people that are able to deliver stories, and they are the most interesting people. You want those people who you'd want to invite to a dinner party because they have all these crazy stories. And not only do they have these amazing stories, but they know how to convey them and talk about them. And that's what you're kind of looking for. And I've noticed like the last, I don't know, maybe like 6 months, something like that, just how important they are and how you can stand out and become really captivating, and people want to become really engaged with you because of the stories you can tell. And if you have a kind of, I mean, he talks about it in this, but like kind of repertoire or an arsenal that you can put all your stories into, so that when you want them and the time is right, you can just whip them out and you know how to deliver them. And I think that's such a powerful skill.
100%. So this book is broken up into 3 parts. So part 1 is about finding your story. Then you've got part 2, which is crafting, and then part 3, which is telling. So, right, we're going to start with part 1, which is finding your story. So why tell stories? Matthew Dix believes sharing personal stories is really valuable. It's like leaving your own mark on the world, showing you are here and moving forward with your life. Sharing stories helps people feel connected, reminding them they're not alone in what they're going through. Stories are powerful because they share our real experiences and feelings, which is why people love listening to them, whether in theatres or bars. They're looking for that sense of connection. So a good story is all about change. It's more than just exciting events. It's about showing how you've grown or changed over time.
So, tell your own story. It's important to tell your own stories because people connect better with them. Even if a story about someone else, like your friend Pete, sounds more interesting, your own stories have a special impact. They feel real and honest because you're opening up about your own life. When you talk about your own experiences, it shows courage and truthfulness, which doesn't come through as strongly if you're telling someone else's story. So it's best to focus on stories where you are the main character. You can still talk about events that involve other people, but make sure you are sharing how these events affected you. This keeps your storyteller genuine and true to yourself. Yeah. You want to convey stories where you're not the NPC, you are the main character. That's what you want in this.
Yeah. And it makes sense though, but then there's like loads of times, I guess, when people obviously like sort of big up their friends maybe and tell stories from down the grapevine. I guess it's not really slamming that in the sense of saying don't ever do that. Like don't ever talk about this like crazy thing that you've seen or heard of. But it's more just if you kind of really want to connect, you're better off sharing your own story and like your own thoughts and feelings and how something changed you. Let's just say.
Yes. Yeah. No, I agree.
So yeah, Matthew Dix, he talks about this thing called the dinner test. So your story should meet the dinner test criteria. And the essence is to evaluate whether the story you're preparing for a public setting, like a stage, boardroom, sales conference, or sermon, for those people who do sermons, is akin to one you casually share with a friend over dinner. This alignment should be your aim. So effective storytelling differs from theatrical performances or poetry. It should resemble a refined version of the anecdotes you would share with friends in a relaxed setting, perhaps even over a drink. This authenticity and relatability of such stories are what make them impactful. And I mean, it's quite good there. It's like, if you're not sharing the story with a friend over a beer or over dinner or something like that, then it's probably not worth sharing on the public stage.
Yes. Yeah, this is actually quite true. Yeah, there's a time and a place.
For sure.
So why unique stories are the hardest to tell? Telling a story about a really scary experience, like nearly losing your life, might be hard for people to connect with because it's so intense. Stories like that can sometimes make listeners feel more distant instead of bringing them closer to you. It's better to avoid focusing on stories that are just about big, dramatic moments. Sharing simpler, more personal experiences, like having a secret crush when you were young, can actually create a stronger bond with your audience. Everyone has their own secrets, things they keep to themselves or hope others will notice. Talking about these shared types of experiences helps make your connection with listeners deeper and more meaningful. And we've kind of touched on this, but maybe with like different language, but the idea that, when you're interested in something, people will be interested in you. And when something is quite personal to you, but like it's not too overwhelming and too kind of obscure for the listener, then I think that they can relate and they can get on the same wavelength where you're coming from much easier.
Yeah, to some extent, they have to see themselves in what you're saying so they can actually empathize and sympathize with you. So yeah, like the example there of, maybe being in a near-death experience. I mean, people do like to do shocking stories, don't they, a little bit? But I feel like people don't really end up empathizing too much with them. They're just almost like shocked, like, oh my God, that's crazy or something like that. Whereas if you sort of want to, bond on a deeper level, I
Mm,
guess what you should be looking at as like, how can I base a story around something that's something that we've all gone through, let's just say, or something that's very common. And to be fair, in a minute when we go through the generation like tactics for stories, they talk about a few sort of techniques for that. But yeah, it's more about picking out something that everybody would sort of can imagine themselves having gone through or something like that. Something that's not too far fetched, right?
yeah,
So,
absolutely.
so cool. Now we're getting into the meat and potatoes. So you've got how to generate more stories. So set a goal to actively discover, observe, and remember and recognize stories in your daily life. By doing so, you'll start viewing your life through a more engaging and interesting lens. So here are 3 techniques to uncover your stories. Number 1 is homework for life. And this is a method to regularly reflect on and note down your daily experiences. It's crucial to uncover the subtle, often overlooked moments in your life. Your aim should be to recognize the small yet significant stories that are already part of your daily experiences. Consider this prompt. Imagine you have to share a story from today, a 5-minute narrative about an event from the day. No matter how mundane or trivial it might seem, what will be the most noteworthy moment that you can remember? If you dedicate time each evening to reflect, what was unique about today? What made it different from other days? Then record your findings. This practice will help you discover the significance and impact of each day, highlighting your role in the broader tapestry of the world. You begin to understand how everyday moments contribute meaningfully to others and the world at large. By consistently noting these moments, you'll find that the time seems to slow down and your life's pace becomes more manageable. The homework for life process shouldn't take more than 15 minutes daily. Gradually, you'll start identifying story-worthy moments as they happen. Life is filled with meaningful experiences, and unless you learn to notice, cherish, and hold on to them, they can easily slip away, like a dandelion seeds in the wind, lost forever. Your goal is to capture these moments and keep them close to your heart. And yeah, you can already just imagine from a thought experiment how useful that might be in
Mm,
terms of, you know, first of all, having gratitude for what goes on day by day, but also, searching for those things that could easily be a story. Like, oh, that was weird that happened today. Oh, that was unique. I haven't faced this before. And we kind of let those things go, like he says, in the wind. You just forget about them. But if you can capture them day to day, and I know you have a practice not specifically about generating stories, but you have a practice, don't you, where you go back for your day and you not note down like some of the most meaningful, obvious events that have gone on, right?
mm. Yeah, well, I think it's just so important. And I like the idea. I really like this idea of the thought experiment because it captures it or it contains it within the boundary of a day. So you're not comparing today's story to one of the most amazing stories you've had before.
Yeah.
because if you do that, then you don't start, then you're almost not able to identify whether you had any stories today, right? Because you're like, oh, today I just was at work, I was just on my desk, right? And so if you're comparing, like, the interesting parts of your day compared to the most interesting day you've ever had, then it just looks mundane and boring. Whereas if you capture it and keep it within one day, and it's like, what was the most interesting thing today?
Yeah.
How can I, like, if I was to sum up, a story today, what am I going to identify? I think those are the things that you take with you, and if you have a place to put that, I think that's really important. And I like the idea of it teaching you a mentality where you start to appreciate small things. You're
Yeah.
not constantly comparing it to, like, oh, I didn't go out and I didn't go to the cinema today or the theater or do something like really big and extravagant. It's like you can just focus on the small things and appreciate them for what they are.
Yeah, and I like his point here about, sort of, consistently noting these moments, you'll find that time seems to slow down. I quite like that idea because you'll start focusing on the more unique experiences you have every day. Whereas I feel like personally at the moment, it depends obviously where I am, but usually when I'm stuck in a sort of space, such as being at home all the time at the moment after the operation, my days mold into one. And because
Yeah.
I'm not reflecting on the unique experiences I am probably having, I'm not even noticing it, and it's all just the time is flying by, and I could almost look back and be like, oh, but what happened during that time? And I could be like, nothing. But there actually is stuff that's going on. I'm just not noting it down
Yeah,
and
exactly.
and actually thinking about it, which this practice would do. Um, so yeah, definitely something that would be worth doing if as well for generating more stories. Then we got number 2, which is crash and burn. This is a way to
Mm.
write freely, to come up with new ideas and remember old ones. It means writing down every thought that comes to mind, no matter how odd or embarrassing. So you've got to follow these 3 rules. Don't stick to any single idea. Don't judge your thoughts, just write them down. And 3, keep writing non-stop. If you can't think of anything, write down numbers, countries, or colors. To do this, to start this, you need to set a timer for 5 minutes and then just begin writing about something random that pops into your head. If you're stuck, pick an object in the room and then write non-stop for 5 minutes. And then spend 10 minutes afterwards going over what you've written to find the interesting elements. And this kind of reminds me a bit like the free association stuff we talked about with, was it in the
Mm.
Better Small Talk? I think it might have been. But yeah, just free
Yeah.
associating and just randomly whatever comes to your head, writing it down, and then just basically brain dumping and seeing, is there anything there that could be useful? Because you never know, there could be something. And to be honest, I personally preferred the homework for life in terms of actual structure, but because I struggle to see, it depends what your mind's like, how that could end up in a story. Because I mean, if you're hungry, there's probably gonna be lots of like chips, burgers, all sorts of stuff in there.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe don't do it when you're hungry. It's probably the
Yeah.
thing to say.
I wonder whether you could apply the association technique to those random, like, words, and then be like, so for instance, if you talk about burger, then you construct, you can use those associations as in, like, oh, I remember the time when I went and had this burger. You use it as like a
Ah,
springboard into, like,
yes.
you using and finding different stories related to that keyword.
Yes. No, I like that a lot. He didn't mention that in the book, but I think that's a great use case of it. Yeah, you riff off the words that come to mind. When was the last time I lit a candle? I'm only saying that because I see a candle in front of me, but something like that, and then you might actually get a story from it, or like a
Mm.
life event, which then could springboard you somewhere else. You're like, oh, I remember there, I was with this person. Oh yeah, I remember that because we did this other story together, or something like that. It kind of spirals into that sort of thought.
Yeah, exactly. Because he kind of touched on it in Better Small Talk with the, like, you know, allowing to being able to guide a conversation towards different destinations if a conversation becomes quite stagnant. And I think he used the weather as an example. But I almost feel like, of the options that he listed, I think he did list one of them, like, oh, I remember when the weather this day was dreadful and we had to run through the rain or something like that. But my point being is, I think that's probably one of the most powerful options in directing a
Yeah,
conversation, because it utilizes that story aspect, and makes it a lot more captivating and more real, and maybe even relatable depending on what you're talking about.
yeah, for sure. I also wonder off the back of that then as well, maybe even cross-pollinating certain things, like maybe picking somebody you've spent a lot of time with, and then just throwing random objects into the mix with it and being like, which
Mm.
object stimulates a thought of when we were together doing something. So just like with you, it'll be like
Yeah, I
Tristan, and
like
I can
that.
just throw in a bunch of objects and be like, okay, when was the last time I saw this object, Tristan? Blah blah blah, and eventually I come up with, oh,
A blue
now I've
shirt.
like remembered. Blue shirt, yeah, the blue shirt boys, the Grand Flume we can never forget. And you are wearing a blue shirt, I'm not. So
There we go.
um,
Uh,
no, but it's just yeah, no, it is that. yeah, it's just like, and I like the point as well. Once again, it reminds me of the Think Faster, Talk Smarter, which is when you're doing this as well, don't judge yourself. There's no like right or wrong answer to this game, because like in that example, what was it? It was something like they got to call an object the wrong name, right? It was the wrong name game, and people used to get in their head being like, that is the wrong name to call it. But the reality is, any name that's wrong is the right name to call something, right, in that game. But people set their own
Yeah,
criteria for
yeah.
that, right? So the whole point is just no matter how crazy your mind is, just write down the stuff. And yeah, I wouldn't like to see what Meat Canyon writes down on his, because that guy has got a weird mind.
Oh, that is too funny. Yeah, bloody hell. Oh, yeah.
Can you
God,
imagine his free association?
his notebooks must be full of crazy associations.
Yeah,
Whew.
exactly.
Yeah.
So we've gone from doing the homework for life. Now we've done the sort of free association, crash and burn. Now the last one is the first, last, best, and worst. So this technique is where you identify and record your first, last, best, and worst experiences. To do this, you create a worksheet, the top row, the x-axis of the page, labeled with first, last, best, and worst, accompanied by a prompts column on the left side, the y-axis. The various prompts are listed below, something like, what was your first kiss? And then therefore it would be, what is your last kiss? What was your best kiss? What was your worst kiss? After filling out the chart, you analyze it by asking 3 questions. Do any entries repeat, indicating a potential story? Can any of these entries be crafted into engaging anecdotes? And then 3, are there entries that could be developed into complete stories? This first, last, best, worst can be played in various ways. If you're searching for stories, you can play solo using prompts like objects in a room, a random dictionary page, or ideas from TV shows or podcasts. And he even mentioned something like you could do this with other people as well. It almost reminds me of like Never
That's
Have
a
You
good
Ever,
point.
but
Yeah.
it's just a bit more detailed. I mean, you don't have to go into those sort of subjects, but just, yeah, what was your first? What was your last? What was your best? What was your worst? I think there's almost too many things you could possibly do this on, but it's interesting because obviously there's usually like, especially with like the stuff like the worst, I think the worst is more interesting for me because I'm like in the
Mm.
worst area, that's probably where you're going to get like the best or the most comedic stories. Like my worst day out or something, my worst holiday. There's going to be something there that's going to be interesting, right? I mean, the best. Nobody wants to hear, "Oh, my best ever holiday was like this, and this." Like, no, I want to hear it was absolutely crap.
Yeah, exactly. I want to hear the worst.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, it's a very I really like that structure actually. I just think it's another one that you can kind of apply to, we've been talking over the last few communication books about having this kind of association network, right? Where you can unlock certain folders that might, or like, certain keywords can lead to other areas, and whether that's like a joke or a quote or a story. And I quite like this as having like within the story kind of structures. It's like, okay, I've got a keyword, a kiss.
yeah,
Now I can see 4 that I could potentially talk about. And I like what you were talking about, how you can also pose that as questions.
yeah.
You know,
100%.
yeah,
I think what
I
we
really like that.
a good way of going about this potential game as well would maybe be something like, I don't know how you do this, and it obviously depends on your friendship group, but just trying to have a like reflect on what comes up in conversation the most with the people you hang out with a lot. If it's whether it's going on holiday or or like a sport or whatever, then play this game with that. So then you always have like a topic or a good story when you're talking about the things you normally talk about. So if you're talking about restaurants you've been to or something, or like I don't know what
Mm.
you talk about, right? But depending on your group, but being able to realize, okay, there's a few keywords like you just said here. Now I'll create like a bunch of stories where around my best, worst, first, last, and then I'll create some really funny stories off the back of it. It doesn't have to be funny, but just stories off it. And then I know in conversation I can just whap it out. Or even the type of conversations you have with strangers. If you know the keywords that keep coming up, you can do exactly the same.
Yes, yeah, no, exactly. And I think you're almost working from the epicenter out, right? Like, so like you said, you have certain words that probably come up in conversation quite a bit. And so you start to identify stories and jokes and things like that that are related to those. But I reckon that the more you start to use them, one, the more they start to become embedded. But also, I reckon if you keep going down those pathways, certain other keywords will pop up, and you realize that that's like another point that you can unlock. So
Yeah.
another word maybe that keeps popping up down that path. So then you start to like work outwards, and you start getting more and more words that you can kind of prepare for, and then eventually they all become embedded.
No,
So I
100%
like the
exactly
idea
that.
of
And
that.
then the word will like kick on further, and then you remember the next bit, or the other. Yeah, you're right, because you've connected all these different, like a web almost. But yeah, it's useful, isn't it? Because I was thinking
Yeah.
when we were discussing about doing this book for the podcast, just how obviously all the other books talked about this, like, oh my god, yeah, you got to stockpile your stories, but it's like it never told you how. And this is pretty actionable. Like these three things here could, you
Mm.
could do these daily, you could do, weekly or whatever on like a review. It's like you didn't have to do these, but I can imagine if you went through one by one and did each of these, you'd come up with at least, 3 or 4 stories. At least I would have thought, because and it's giving you direction of where you're going to go looking, and I like that a lot. I specifically think the worst for me is always going to be
Exactly.
the most interesting, like worst holiday you've been on or something, because there's
Yeah.
always going to be something there that's just infinitely more interesting when something's gone wrong. Because I mean, if
Yes.
it's almost like the whole point of like, I can't remember where I saw it, but it was like Superman's kind of boring because he doesn't have any flaws, and he's like basically invincible, so there's no
Mm.
jeopardy. And that's kind of what happens when you describe your perfect holiday. It's like everything went amazing. It's like, no, I don't give a fuck about that. I want to know the one which was like went terribly wrong, because at least there's drama.
Yes, and I think, you could, okay, let's say you're talking about the best holiday ever. The only thing that like that really does for the other person is just, I don't know, they can't really do anything about it. Whereas I think if you're talking about like the worst holiday ever, they have some level of like, they can contribute because it's funny, or like, they can't really contribute that
Ooh,
much if there's just
yeah.
everything's great, you know?
You might inspire them to give you to give you a story of theirs when they had like a really horrible experience too. And you also is that point from like how
Yeah.
to have possible conversations where you model the behavior which you want, which is like, hey, I'm not here to talk about how rosy my life is and how great everything is. I'm here to just get into it and just say it as it is. Um, I encourage you to do the
Yeah,
same.
exactly. Like, because if you had a kind of competition based on how good everything was, then you'd almost be just trying to outdo the other person, which there are those people. I mean, I've met so many of those people where you're just telling a story for the sake of it. And then someone comes up and he's like, yeah, you went there. Well, I went here and I stayed at this 5-star. And you're just like, mate, that wasn't the point of the story. But then also on the other flip side of that, if you're talking about some self-deprecating story and then someone else tells one, you're
Yeah, that
kind of
can
just
become a
going like
competition too.
trying to find
Like
who's
I
worse
had an
off.
even worse story. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Um,
Fortunately, you can't.
Funny.
Yeah, you can't prepare for that really. If somebody
Not
decides to
quite.
roll with your worst story and shit all over it, then they can.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So now we have finished part one, which is finding your story. So let's reflect on what we've covered. So we've covered why you should tell stories, why it's best to tell your own story, the dinner test, why unique stories are the hardest to tell, and then the 3 techniques to uncover more stories. So the homework for life, the crash and burn, the first, last, best, and worst. So now that we've found our story, it is time to craft it.
Yeah. So, part 2, crafting your story. Every story has a 5-second moment. So, every great story, irrespective of its length, depth, or tone, fundamentally revolves around a pivotal 5-second moment in someone's life. To reiterate, the essence of any powerful narrative is about crystallizing a belief. Oh, a brief, transformative instance in a human's experience. Pardon me. When you believe you have a story to tell, consider these questions. 1. Does it revolve around a specific transformative 5-second moment? And 2. Is this moment a true turning point? In telling true stories from our lives, we begin with the end in mind. We're not fabricating a story. We're not aiming to conjure the perfect blend of action, description, and dialogue. Instead, we're uncovering and articulating a defining moment of real experience. I quite like that. It kind of just hits the nail on the head. It's just like, you're just starting to look for that pure essence of something that could lend to a story,
Yeah.
that 5 seconds that then once you've obtained, then you can kind of work back from.
Yeah, it's almost like when you make the decision to do something, right? Like you've been building up to this point and then you finally change and do it and overcome whatever it is, right? That's kind of the point here.
Yeah, exactly. So in a story, the parts that make a key moment clear and strong are really important and should be highlighted. This moment is the heart of the story, the main point and the most exciting part. It's why you're telling the story at all. So it's best to put this moment near the end of your story, sometimes even as the very last thing you say, because then it can build up suspense, you know.
Yeah,
You
like
want
how's
people sitting on the edge of their seats if they're sitting, you know, when you're telling this story. Um, Often storytellers focus too much on the big picture and miss the small but powerful moments. Instead of talking about a whole summer in Tanzania, it's the tiny, meaningful experiences that truly matter.
I mean, that's a repeat of kind of what we discovered with the homework for life, which is, looking for those tiny little
Mm.
details within a trip, let's just say, that reveals a change or a moment or something that you can build a story around, right? And I guess with that as well is kind of being as specific as possible. Um, you want to, detail each and every moment, how you were feeling, etc., to kind of build up that to that point, rather than just being like, yeah, that day was cool, we chilled by the pool, whatever. It's like, no, this happened. Somebody dropped the glut like ice cold all over me, and I was freezing and whatever. Something that makes it a bit more interesting than just, yeah, oh, we were just doing this, or we're just relaxing by the beach. Cool. So next, we've got to look for the start of your story. So the challenging aspect of storytelling is often identifying the right starting point, as life presents numerous possible moments to choose from. So, how to find your story start? To determine where you begin your story, first begin where it ends. Define the essence of your 5-second moment, the climax or transformative point of your narrative. Once you pinpointed this, think about what the complete opposite of that moment is. The start of your story should contrast starkly with its conclusion. This contrast sets up the arc of your story, illustrating the change that occurs over time. For an easy application of this concept, consider the first 15 minutes of most movies. Often, the opposite of these initial scenes will hint at how the film will end, such as, classic ones are like where the person's maybe really selfish and only looks out for themselves. And, by the end of it, they are self sacrificing and they want to save the community, let's just say. At the beginning, they're selfish, they don't care. Then at the end, they become the hero, right? So when you start your story in a place that's the antithesis of your 5-second moment, and as close to the end as possible, you create a strong narrative arc. This approach not only gives your story direction, but also makes it more engaging for the audience, as they can begin to anticipate the journey from one point to the other. With this all being said, though, finding the beginning can be complex, as the opposite of your climactic moment might not occur around the same time. Therefore, it's advisable to start your stories as close to the end as possible. This approach keeps the story focused, avoids unnecessary details, and makes it easier for you as a storyteller. A simplified narrative helps in remembering the story, mastering the transitions, and ensuring that key lines and moments are effectively conveyed. Another top tip is stories inherently depict some form of change, which doesn't always have to be positive or grand. Narratives about failure, embarrassment, or even small incremental changes can be compelling. The key is to show a clear transformation from the beginning to an end. I mean, isn't that really like, what a tragedy story is? Like, there's not like a big hero at the end. It's all about the sadness, I guess, of the human, what's the word, like experiment, I guess you could call it.
Okay, so 2 simple tips for starting a story. So, number one, start with action. Kick off your story by jumping right into something happening. Be in the middle of the action. This makes your story exciting from the start and pulls your audience in. And then two, don't hype it up too much. Notice how others begin their stories with phrases like, "This is hilarious," or "You won't believe this." Here's why you might want to avoid doing that. So, number one, keep expectations real. Saying something is hilarious might make people expect too much and they could end up disappointed. Same with "You won't believe this." It might promise more than the story delivers. Just let your story happen without bigging it up first. And then two, keep them guessing. When you label your story at the start, it sets up people to expect something specific, like a laugh or a shock. But if you don't, your story can have a stronger, more surprising effect. And number three, dive right in. Instead of telling people what to think of your story, it's more interesting to just start telling the story itself. And I think those are some pretty good points, actually. I like the idea of like starting mid action. It's just like it just like gets people out of their seat. It kind of shocks them a little bit. And then also that shock is accentuated when you don't, oh, there was this hilarious thing that happened last week.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think there's some good points to keep in mind.
For sure, the whole expectation setting, like whenever somebody says something's going to be hilarious, it actually might be hilarious, but by putting that at the start, they've almost immediately made it less hilarious because you're already getting ready for like the punchline or the stupidity that's about to be said. Whereas if they don't even bring that up and they just tell a really funny story, you're just bound to laugh because you
Mm.
didn't have the expectation up front. So, oh my god, that is actually really funny. And you won't believe this. So many people have this, like, I don't know, like you do meet some people who completely over like Kate or overcook this sort of thing. They're like, oh my god, this you will not believe what happened, and then it's something that's like really believable, and you're like, okay, like yeah, that's crazy, dude.
Yeah,
That
some
is
people are hyperbolic, aren't they, Jeff?
that could be that. Cool. So moving on to that, we've now got
Hyperbolic
stakes.
will, yeah.
Oh, yeah. We've now got stakes, and this is about keeping your story compelling. Like, while I did like this concept, I mean, I'm sure you've heard of it many times before, but I like how he first of all breaks it down, and then also talks about how you can actionably increase stakes in a story. So, stakes in a story are what capture and
Mm.
maintain the audience's attention. High stakes create tension and engagement. They are the risks, impacts, and rewards of a character's choice, which make audiences care about the story. They usually divide into three categories: external, which is the physical consequences, I guess, such as death; internal, emotional, mental consequences; and then the philosophical, which is the underlying ideas and values, which could be, under siege through something that changes in the narrative. They address the key questions such as: what are the storyteller's desires and necessities? What risks are involved? What is the storyteller advocating for or against? What developments are on the horizon, and how will the narrative resolve? Stakes create a compelling contrast, like the difference between a mundane story about someone's mother and an intense tale about a time when they considered disowning their mother. A story becomes dull if it lacks significant stakes, or if the stakes aren't substantial enough to engage the listener. If a story fails to captivate, let the audience's mind drift, or simply doesn't hold interest, it's often because it lacks sufficient stakes. And I thought this is quite an interesting point because it reminds me a bit of the Superman
Mm.
sort of thing, which is why they introduced bloody kryptonite. Because if there wasn't something that could kill him, what is the point of watching a guy just go around beating up bad guys all the
Just
time? I
be
mean, although
so
that's
boring.
every Jason Statham movie ever, but still, there has to be a part of like jeopardy where you're like, I'm actually scared for the hero here. I do not know what's going to happen, which is almost the reason why people loved Game of Thrones so much, was because you didn't know who was going to be bloody killed. You thought, oh, this guy's the main character. Next minute he's dead. You're like, oh my god, at any point
Yeah.
my favorite character could die, and it keeps you gripped. Whereas like Marvel movies, like I mean, to be fair, it sounds really bad. The best thing they did is probably killing off Iron Man. Actually, there is some real jeopardy there, or even the end of Infinity War when they obviously half the universe disappeared. It's like, oh my god, they actually killed somebody. Like this is nuts. Like people, they actually can die in this universe, you know. And it is interesting because it does make sense if there is stories where somebody's too powerful, or you know, I guess there's just no risk to the main character. You're just not invested, are you? Just like, well, he's gonna win, he's gonna save the day. Oh,
Yes, exactly. I think you have to have that. Otherwise there is no change, essentially. If there are no stakes, there's no problem, right? And so there's nothing to solve. So that it's just flat. Why are you watching it in the first place? I think you have to have some kind of stakes because that's the reason why your main character, overcomes something, or like, picks up the courage to go and do something that will then elicit that change. And then there's, the ending, the result, which is
yeah.
opposite to the beginning. But you need that for it to, like, it's almost the motivation, right?
No, it literally is directly in my head related to the
Yeah,
motivation,
it's
right?
so
Like
true.
it's the motivation to avoid death, the motivation to save somebody. Yeah, it's the how
Yeah,
large is that motivation, essentially.
because also, like, I mean, I'm looking at this from an acting perspective now, but no character or person does anything without really a motivation, like a reason. They have to be
Mm.
motivated to do something. So whenever you're, like, constructing a character, a lot of it is about, okay, well, what are the reasons for doing this? Why is he motivated to do this? What are the stakes here? The stakes are almost the first
Yeah.
part, and then you're like, okay, that's the
It's
motivation there.
it's a very good point, and a lot of film critics, obviously, especially around some of the the lazy writing that goes on here, like this day and age, there is no real like, or one of the main criticisms I guess you see is just like that character just lacks like real. It's just like they're not real. Their motivations don't exist. Like what is their motivation? It's unclear. There's no backstory. A bit like the Roadhouse with Conor McGregor. Like what the hell was he doing in that movie? Like what was his motivation apart from being the
I
dad's
get it
like
absolutely.
bodyguard or something? We don't even know
Jesus.
that. It's just like he's just some crazy cokehead. He's running around trying to kill the
Yeah.
main character. And it's just like there is no reason apart from
Yeah.
he just wants bloodlust or something. But like that's in my head like lazy storytelling and lazy writing. It's like we can't even be bothered to create the stakes or create the backstory for this person so you can even understand their motivations or why they're there.
No, exactly. And I think it happens loads with like villains because they're just painted as evil,
Yeah, so
right?
one
They're
dimensional.
just, it's
Yeah,
not that they have a reason or
yeah.
there's anything at stake. It's just like, you look at Thanos in this regard and it's like, well, there's no equilibrium. There's not enough resources for the universe. So he's trying to halve the
But he was a
population. At
more
least there's
compelling
like
villain,
kind
right?
of a reason for it.
He was a more
Yeah,
compelling like,
exactly.
people actually like thought he was quite compelling as a villain in comparison, or like I think some people actually ended up siding with him, didn't they? They were like, actually, do you know what? I can understand that. The genocidal people out there, but
Well,
like,
also take the Joker.
yes, yeah, the corruption, yeah.
The Joker in the latest one, a
Mm.
lot of people related to that. That's why it was kind of so like impactful because you're like, okay, I can kind of see how he's got to this point. There are the stakes there, and it's his reasoning and it's his
Yeah,
motivations.
I guess this is why people quite
There's
like
never,
these
yeah,
characters with a bit more depth, isn't it? Everybody's like, I really like these, the characters they built out here because they show just not just like you said a one dimensional side of evil. Like this guy's just going around beating up people because he's a sadist. Because that is very rare in the real world. You literally never see it really. As we read from the Evil book by Roy
yeah,
Baumeister, most of the people are a mix of good and evil, and usually their evil undertakings are based upon like a rational belief or belief of that they're doing good. So if anything, these people are painting themselves in a picture that they're doing the greater good. But at the moment, what you see is a lot of people just being over the top sadists, enjoying inflicting pain on people and basically being massive bullies because it's just easier, I guess, to create
yeah,
the dichotomy of hero vs villain or good vs evil. And you almost, I guess it makes you so mad, doesn't it, when you see somebody acting in such a horrible way. You're just like, we need to punish them, and that's why you watch the film. You're like, I can't wait for him to get his justice or whatever.
yeah, exactly. All right, so moving on then. Techniques for building stakes in storytelling. So, 5 ways to increase the stakes. Number 1, the elephant. Every story needs an elephant, a clear and evident issue that everyone recognizes. This could be a direct statement of a problem, need, or mystery. It tells your audience what to expect and assures them they are listening to a story with a direction. An example: I'm stuck in New Hampshire with a flat tire and no spare. This sets the stage immediately, presenting a clear problem and creating instant stakes. Then, number 2, backpacks. Use backpacks to load your audience with anticipation about what's to come. Describe your hopes and fears before advancing the narrative. This aligns the audience's emotions with yours, especially when things don't go as planned. For example, in a story about a failed attempt to get gas, the audience shares the storyteller's disappointment because they were primed with his plans and hopes. Number 3, breadcrumbs. Drop hints about future events without giving away too much. The goal is to keep the audience curious and guessing about what's next. For example, mentioning a specific item like a uniform and leaving the audience wondering how it will play into the story. Quite like that. Little Easter egg.
Yeah.
And then number 4, hourglasses. So when you reach a pivotal moment in your story, slow down. Describe unnecessary details, prolonging the suspense. This builds anticipation and makes the audience eager to hear what happens next. And then number 5, crystal balls. Make a false prediction within your story. This should be something plausible and intriguing, leading your audience to wonder if it will actually occur. Example: suggesting a potential future event like an arrest to create suspense about whether it will happen. And I think that's quite a good one as well. I quite like that one.
Yeah, they're all pretty good. You can identify a lot of those in films. You can like identify a lot of them, right? Like for example, with the breadcrumbs, you is like when they like take a picture or they pan a shot and they have like a knife in the corner, and you kind of like, oh, is that going to be used in the future? And then obviously the backpack is them
Yeah,
talking to
yeah,
their partner or whatever about what they want to happen, and then obviously something goes goes array. I mean, elephant's pretty obvious, especially in film. They usually set up
Yeah.
the first scene like that, don't they? Hourglass I thought was quite interesting though. I think it would work very well in
Mm.
novels. Like this, like they're having this big fight, and then he just starts describing, the breath or the fire in the background or whatever, and you're just like, who's gonna kill who or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're all pretty
No,
actionable as
they're
well. I quite
pretty
like them
cool.
because you can always just look at your story and be like, right, how can I, backpack here, or how can I place an object that's going to tease, or how can I, reference in the future potentially something that might not happen and keep them on their edge. Because quite a lot of films, it almost reminds me a bit like The Hangover, you know, where they're just at the end of the film, or no, they're at the middle of the film, aren't they? When they're like, oh, we're going to miss the wedding or whatever, and then it goes back. And it's like,
Yes,
how do
yeah,
they get to that point?
exactly. Yeah, that's a good point.
So, next, then, we've got the questions to evaluate the stakes within your story. So, you will need to ask yourself the following: would my audience be eager to hear my next sentence? If I stopped speaking now, would they be left wanting more? And at this moment, is my story more captivating than distractions like video games or other entertainments? So, the key to effective storytelling is to keep your audience invested and anticipating what comes next. And obviously, I don't think you can ever create this like the ultimate thing where every single sentence keeps somebody gripped to the point where you
Yeah,
know
of course.
they want to read the next one. But there is, when you read lots of like, I don't personally read novels, but when I was younger and I used to read a lot of nonfiction, fiction, there used to be a lot of times where I was like, I literally can't put this book down. And I do wonder whether the secret ingredients are based off those things there. So like the elephant, the backpack and stuff, where they just keep you wanting more and they tease you a little bit with what is going to happen. Because I noticed quite a lot of
Mm.
novels, like they'll jump to the future maybe, or jump to like, they will jump to the future and they sort of tease things and they'll jump back. And you're like, okay, well, how's that manifested itself? And there is, I guess, some sort of like art form to this in a sense of just like finding a way to package all these different ideas and create a narrative that actually grips people. I don't think it's like a linear thing
Yeah,
like that. That's what I'm
absolutely.
saying. Like I don't think it's like a
Yeah,
playbook.
no, I agree. I think it's it's an actual skill, right? Where you can actually improve at evaluating. I think you're right. You're never going to be able to have every word almost like what Jordan Peterson says. You need every sentence that's perfect and every word within that sentence that's perfect. You're not writing an essay here, but I think it does train your ability to be able to evaluate, especially in like while you're speaking. You're able to get so much feedback from people, and the better you are at reading people, the more you can actually gauge whether people are on the edge of their seat when you're talking. And then you can slightly switch things up, or the way you say things. I mean, we almost naturally do this whenever we tell a story, and it's a story that happened recently and you're telling multiple different people. You almost tell it in exactly the same way, but you tweak it here and there. It's like, oh, this didn't get the laugh like I was expecting last time. This is how I'm going to kind of change it. And you almost do that intuitively. But I think you can train that ability to kind of evaluate as you're telling a story, so that you can kind of hone
Yeah.
in on things that you should improve next time.
I quite like the idea as well of when you're about to say or whenever you're analyzing, let's just say the stories that you've created from the first part, so using the three techniques, just thinking about the questions of like, how can I apply stakes to the story? How can I set up front the circumstance where people are going to want me to succeed or fail? Like how can I build in stakes, or even if there were smaller stakes, how can I use hyperbole and exaggerate the stakes a little bit to make it more
Yeah,
interesting?
yeah,
Or even then, or
yeah. I
maybe
agree.
if there's no stakes, how can I just tease it? How can I tease the ending, but then like take people the wrong way or whatever? I think it's definitely worth considering these questions as you're going through the first part of the generation. Like once you've generated the ideas, then go through and think, right, what are the stakes in this scenario, or how at least can I was going to say exaggerate. I don't like the word exaggerate because that accentuate the stakes.
Yeah. No, but I think you're right, and it's kind of emphasizes the point of having that kind of system that captures all these stories. Like at the end of the day, you write down what was the best story that I had today or whatnot, and you can kind of tick off all these questions as you're writing it down, right? Like what were the three, what were the stakes, what were the what was the turning point, how did I change? You could do this very quickly if you just had like a kind of system set up, so that you kind of got it there and ready, so that if you want to look over it, you could just have a quick glimpse and you know where to stand.
100%.
Yeah. All right, so the 5 permissible lies of true storytelling. These are not exactly falsehoods, but subtle tweaks to the reality for storytelling purposes. The 5 lies. So, number 1, omission. Strategic omissions are key. Telling every detail is impractical. Remove elements, especially extraneous characters, that don't serve the story's core purpose. So, for example, ending a story or a novel slightly before the audience wants it to conclude, leaving them with lingering questions and curiosity. Number 2, compression. This involves considering the timelines or spaces for clarity. Simplify the story's time frame to maintain flow and avoid confusing the audience with unnecessary complexity. And that's actually a big one because you get that a lot when people tell a lot of stories where they're like, oh yeah, so this was 2 years before, but it was like a year after I left uni, and already you're like starting to lose people, you know.
Yes.
Um, Number 3, assumption. So you should only guess the details when they are essential to your story. For instance, if you need your audience to visualize a car you're going to crash into, it's okay to decide on the car's make, model, or color, even if you don't remember exactly. Although, if you crash into the car, you probably should know what model and color it was
Depends on the
afterwards.
strength of the concussion.
That's true. This is very true. Um, Number 4, progression. So, altering the sequence of events for emotional impact or clarity. This is less common but can be used to enhance the audience's emotional journey. And then number 5, conflation. So, concentrating the emotional and intellectual essence of an event into a shorter time frame. This heightens entertainment by fitting significant changes into a condensed period, as often seen in movies.
Yeah.
And I rate those 5. I think they're pretty good, actually.
I think they're quite good in the sense of you can almost use them as a checklist potentially to go through your story, right? And think like, oh, like you just said there, when somebody talks about their leaving uni, but then it was the year after they left uni or something like that was a bit, convoluted, and just be like, oh yeah, after I left uni, just like one
Yeah.
sentence. The ability to go through and be like, do I need to compress here? Am I making an assumption here? And does it matter if I make an assumption? Can I, reduce the time of the? Let's just say it took you 2 weeks to decide something. You could then turn it into 1 second where you just had this emotional epiphany and it was made, kind of thing. And then also, yeah, omission. I guess you can remove certain, like you said, characters that don't exist, or sorry, don't exist, characters or people that didn't matter in the story, but you somehow like you're just, oh yeah, he was there. It's like, but did that add anything to the story? You might as well just,
Yeah.
get rid of it. Um,
And I,
so
I
use
think that's key, isn't it? Is like, get rid of extraneous information, things that don't really add anything to the story. And that, okay, yeah, you might remember, but like, does it impact the story whatsoever? Does it like take away from the story? You want to simplify it almost and get rid
yeah.
of those extraneous details.
For sure. And he then moves on here to talk about the essential caveats of when you should lie. So there's only 3 reasons why you should lie, apparently, and one is for the audience's sake. So our alterations to reality should always be in service of the audience's understanding and enjoyment, never for personal glorification or to hide our shortcomings. So yeah, it's yeah, that's probably a good one, isn't it? 2, acknowledging memory's flaws. Remember that memory is not infallible. Each retelling of a story might inadvertently alter its truth, subtly changing it over time. And that just it reminds me of what you said a minute ago, where if you're saying the same story again and again and again, of course, occasionally you're going to say different words in a different way, maybe even structure it slightly differently each time. And that's just because we're not robots. We can't just churn out exactly the same information that's been put in. It's kind of depending on a lot of different things, right? I guess as long as you're not completely altering the story, then it's fine. Um, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of Chinese whispers, in the sense that people
Mm,
pass on these stories, and because nobody can remember them 100%, they, and the bits that stick out to them, they'll, emphasize more when they tell the story, and they'll, then eventually the story completely changes, and eventually the popularization of the story is
yeah.
completely different to the original story, if that makes sense. Which is quite scary, because if you put a story out there, all of a
Yeah,
sudden,
it's so true.
turns around backwards, and then you're like the villain of the story, because people have just misheard.
Yes, exactly.
And then 3, the last one is sticking to the truth. So we must never invent new elements or events. Our role is to reshape the existing facts and memories, but not to add fiction to them. So the point here is not to add completely random things like, like if you didn't crash a car, don't say you did. That's probably a good one to start with.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, love it how he's once. We're caught out for justifying lying again, aren't we?
Well, it's kind of funny, yeah. Like we've kind of talked about why you shouldn't lie, and then now we're kind of justifying it in stories. But I think it's highlighting the fact that you know tweaking certain things here and there. It's like you want to tweak or you don't want to, but if it suits the story, tweak the peripheral, details, not things that are core to the message or actually change the message or change the actual
Oh,
story. It's almost like things that like build up certain components of the story but aren't integral to it.
yeah.
um
Yeah, it's
and I think
interesting
like
because like when you think about it as well, the whole point of like lying, not lie. Well, I guess it is technically lying or stretching the truth, which technically whatever is a lie, right? It's it's in the service, I guess, of the story, of which most people assume is entertainment. I guess your problem comes when
mm,
you try and conflate a story with truth. Like if you're trying to say it as like a factual recollection to somebody and convince them that these things took place, adding a bit of spice to it is probably, maybe misdirecting them. I don't know, is a hard one, isn't it? Because you can't really you can't go like, hey guys, let me just set the expectations up front. I'm going to tell you a story and I've exaggerated a lot of it, but you're going to love it. Can you imagine? Like they're just going to be
yeah.
like,
Yeah.
no. So it's a hard one because obviously
There
most
are a
stories are there
lot
to
of
entertain,
lies omission in here, but
right? Oh,
uh it's interesting that you mentioned that though, because the way that we perceive and we record and memorize life is not necessarily in the same format and structure that we would communicate to someone else.
yes.
We do have procedural memory, and I think we do understand things in a kind of story narrative, but not necessarily the same kind of story narrative that you would use to describe to someone else, right?
Yeah.
In the terms of like, it doesn't necessarily have that entertainment factor in it, where like certain details should be accentuated and others shouldn't. And so I feel like in order to entertain, like you're saying, there are certain things that you tweak here and there, just so that it emphasizes this or accentuates that, and so that it
To
becomes
some
more
extent,
entertaining.
you
It's
have
not
to
like,
stretch to entertain because if you didn't, it would just be reality, and reality people find boring. So you have to like
yeah.
increase the stakes or increase the perceived stakes to just make it more dramatic. I mean, essentially, that's what all stories do to some extent: is they make reality more dramatic by creating higher
Mm.
stakes. Technically, every time you go around driving your car, you're risking your life to some extent based on the statistics. So you could just be like, oh, dramatize that, but we don't because it's boring and it's mundane and it's like it's weird, isn't it? We almost want to trick ourselves into the non-reality of stories because it gives us a sort of break from the mundane reality. It's life. And it makes me sound really depressed when I
Yeah.
say that, but I promise you, I'm not.
No, but it's an interesting point, because I think you're also coming from you're you're changing the lens at which you view the very thing that you're talking about, right? So let's say you take that example of almost crashing a car.
Yeah,
When you're doing it, like when you almost crash the car, or if you crash the car, the way that your eyes and your brain are like recording everything, it's in like survival mode. It's focusing on different components than what you might focus on when you're telling that story.
of
Because if
course.
you like didn't crash the car
Yeah,
but it was
because
close and it's
oh
supposed to be a comedic, right? Then
yeah,
you're focusing on other things, right? It's
yeah,
like, oh, mum is like texting me and she says, oh, don't crash the car, and then I almost crash the car, right?
yeah,
You're
yeah, yeah.
focusing on that in the story, but in reality you're not
Also,
kind of.
what you do is you would probably go back in time to like the pre-story of the almost crash or crash. But the reality
Mm.
is, at that moment, you probably weren't even thinking because obviously you didn't even contemplate crashing. So it was very much like you were in automatic mode. You weren't even thinking at all. Then obviously, because you crash, everything beforehand then becomes this whole like dramatic story that builds to crescendo. When in the reality, it didn't build like a crescendo in that moment because you were just there driving
Yeah, yeah.
normal, like no difference. It's almost
It
like we
when
add
you're
the
telling a
spice afterwards,
story,
don't we? Because like when
exactly, when you're
most of the
telling a story, you
disastrous
have.
stuff happens without us thinking about it, right? Because we're just naturally going through life without we're not thinking this is going to happen because we can't predict it. Otherwise, we'd avoid it, wouldn't we? Like so
No,
it's
precisely. You get to choose the reference point of comparison when you're telling a story. You
mm,
get to take that little snapshot of time, whereas that isn't reality. Like you said, there's never like a story occurring. It's just you're just living. That's it. Um, and
no,
therefore, as
exactly. You
soon as you
post create
choose
the
that
story, yeah.
snapshot,
You create the story
exactly.
post, yeah. And if obviously if nothing happened, that wouldn't be a
Interesting.
story because you'd be like, oh yeah, I just drove to this place. and everything
Yeah.
before it wasn't like meaningful, but it becomes meaningful because of that one event. It
Yeah.
is really interesting if you think about it like that.
It also highlights the point that you could almost take any snapshot in time, and within that, if you were to ask that question that he probed earlier in the book summary, like what was the story from here? If I was to sum this up, so it
Yeah.
wouldn't even have to be a day; it could be a half day, or like what happened in the last hour that I would tell someone about. Kind of like that. You get to manipulate the time frame.
Well, the results, you can start creating this. You can create the drama behind what led to the result.
Yeah.
You know what happened, yeah, and then you could focus on certain events that you didn't realize at the time were important, but have become obviously important post it happening, right? It's the classic post
Yeah.
rationalization. Everything happens obviously afterwards because that's the way you make meaning out of what's happened, right? You can't just predict meaning because if you could, you would be ahead of the whole world and you'd be able to predict the future, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And then also, I think there's another fact to consider whereby not everything happens all at once, right? So like
Yeah,
some of the results may come in like a month later. Like you got a speeding ticket for going down a road, and then you have a story based on this event that happened a month ago plus the result. And so
mm.
you're not always hit with the reality until much later. And then it kind of like is story worthy. Yeah, it's so interesting. You can tell how it really is entwined with our perception, what we perceive, what we consider important or not important, or relevant to the
But we don't
story,
even think
or
about it at the
relevant
time,
to
do
the
we?
outcome. Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
you don't think about it at the time. You're not like, this is going to be
no.
super important for my narrative that's about to unfold. But it's like,
Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
yeah, but it is.
Funny. All right. Moving on then. So, every moment in your story needs a location. The secret to telling a great story is making every part happen in a specific place. Your story should move from one clear location to another. This makes your audience picture the story in their minds like a movie. When each part of the story has a clear setting, it feels more alive and flows smoothly, like watching a film. But if people can't tell where the story is happening, they stop picturing it like a movie. They stop being lost in your story and start just looking at you again. To keep your audience's imagination running, always make sure you say where each scene is happening. This way, you're not just telling a story, you're making them feel like they're part of it, which makes your story not just good, but unforgettable. And I think that makes a lot of sense. It's like, once again, you want to give them a lot of hooks to hook onto, right?
Mhm.
If you can start to paint something, and I think a lot of the time with stories, descriptive words come in really well, because
Mhm.
then people can start to imagine it, and when they can imagine it, then they can
Especially like
start to see this
sensory stuff,
unfolding
like
in
the
mirror.
heat, the smells,
Absolutely.
etc. Like that they're really good because people then can start imagining that sort of scenario, that location a bit better, right?
Yeah, otherwise it almost becomes a bit abstract.
Like, oh, it was a hot place.
Sorry.
You could be like, oh, it was hot, but then it's
Yeah.
like, it was absolutely sweltering. You could taste the heat on your tongue. That type of thing just makes it just that infinitely more interesting than just, yeah, it's pretty hot there.
Yeah.
We have, that's nobody write a book with that, but it's obvious when you see the
The hot
difference.
place.
Yeah, the hot place,
Yeah.
the desert.
Yeah, it's funny, and I think there's also that also gives you a lot of opportunity for comedic elements as well, because you're describing something. You can almost introduce humor about like how hot it was, or how dark or miserable it was. Like, or was
Yeah,
as
for sure.
miserable as my mother-in-law's place or something like that.
Yes,
It's you kind of start to introduce like other elements because it allows you that opportunity.
I like that.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, because you need to go off like commonalities there, like, oh, it's about as miserable as your
Mm.
mother-in-law's place. Lol.
Yeah.
No, I like that. Yeah. Cool. So, moving on to the next one, or the next point, which is the principle of but and therefore. And I really like this one. So, the uses of but and therefore. In storytelling, the most effective connective elements are often the words but and therefore, along with their various synonyms. These words, whether used explicitly or implied, are crucial in signaling shifts and progressions in the narrative. But and therefore indicate a change in direction. The story may be proceeding one way, but then it veers off in a new path with but. an action occurs, and therefore, and then with therefore, an action occurs, and therefore a consequence or a new development emerges. These worlds help make the story more dynamic. They make sure the story isn't just going in a straight line, but is always leading us to something new. Matthew Dix's storytelling students who employ this technique often find it clarifies their storytelling process, providing a clear sense of direction and making it easier to decide how to start the next scene. One student remarked, "I feel like I know where to go where to go next in my stories when I'm stuck. I just look for the but or the therefore." A story isn't just about listing what happened; it's about showing the changes and developments. So using but and therefore, it will help you tell stories that grab and keep your audience's attention. I quite like that. Like, if you're ever stuck for your next
Mm.
sentence, like, right, how can I put a therefore? So, like, this has caused this, or a but. And, like, I think it's obviously quite simple, but as a framework, it's quite useful.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just like a handy little tactic to pull out. And I reckon this comes in very helpful when you're reading your audience and you might be a little confused or they look a little confused. And so you can suddenly just whip that out and help get you back on track.
Yeah. Therefore.
So, the power of negative. The power of negative. Another key facet of the but and therefore storytelling principle is the effectiveness of using negatives. Strangely enough, in storytelling, expressing what something or someone is not tends to be more impactful than stating what they are. Consider this comparison. I am dumb, ugly, and unpopular. Or
Got you to say on the
I,
podcast.
you set me up for this,
I'm
Jess,
gonna
didn't you?
clip that
You
up.
knew I'd be reading
Clip
the
that up
section and you would just Tristan is it goes on. Look, I'm not smart, I'm not good looking, and I'm not liked by anyone. God, I quit.
Oh.
The
These
latter
actually were the
sentence.
examples in the book, just to let you know. I'm just crazy. Oh,
Yeah,
got that on video.
yeah, of course. The latter sentence is more compelling. This is because it implicitly includes a but. It subtly suggests the alternative, presenting a contrast rather than a straightforward declaration.
Yeah, you can see that. You
Mm,
can see why that'd be the case, right? Like
yeah,
when it's more declarative, like I am dumb, it almost seems unchangeable and static. Whereas the not for
yeah,
some reason, and I do agree with what he says here, gives it that sort of air of there could be change.
yeah.
I don't know why it does. It just it's something that I can't really explain. Maybe people are listening might disagree with that, but I do think personally, if I saw that, I'd be like, okay, that does leave it sort of open to change.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's interesting. It doesn't like almost seem logical, but
No, not at all. There is no
written
logical
down, but
reason for
actually,
it, is
yeah.
it? But it kind of just there must be something to do with like the linguistics of it. I don't know.
I guess maybe if you're, I'm probably overlooking this, but if it's like a personal opinion and you're saying I am not smart,
Mm.
actually, I don't know.
Do you know what I mean? Like it, I
I
guess
feel like we naturally have resort to thinking that people are harder on themselves, so
maybe
maybe it gives us the idea that they could improve. I
yeah,
don't know.
maybe it's that.
I'm just spitballing, but
Maybe it's
yeah,
just because the amount of times we've seen it, the context of that. Whenever they say not, is usually like you said they're being hard on themselves, and that's why you kind of like you
yeah,
almost hit back a bit, like oh maybe you are.
yeah. You are dumb.
Oh dear, it's all
uh,
funny. Right. So next we've got big stories are hard stories. So telling big stories presents a unique challenge because their grand, significant elements are often one of a kind, extraordinary, and less relatable. This is a common thread in all substantial narratives. The key to effectively narrating a big story lies in focusing not on the grandiosity, but on the smaller, more relatable, and understandable aspects within it. It's about identifying and highlighting those elements of the story that people can connect with and comprehend on a personal level. So that kind of links back to what we were talking about in part one, where it was, if you've had like a near-death experience, there's probably a small amount of people who will be able to sort of empathize and connect with that type of story.
mm,
But here he's also like arguing against that, which is if you do have a story such as that to tell, try and at least create the sort of minuscule details to be relatable. Maybe about how you were feeling about it. People could probably relate to that more than the actual event itself.
yeah, yeah. No, I agree. I think it's quite a skill to be able to tell a large narrative, a large story, and be able to really like compel people and like really captivate them. I think very few people can do it really well, and it's a skill that I would love to be able to do, because it's something that I think is completely different than telling an ordinary story. When someone like, it's almost like you've got people sitting down properly listening to you to tell a story. And I remember watching a video of, I think it was Marco Pierre White, and he was asked one question at, I think it was one of those like Oxford talks, and he's obviously like a very big chef, and he just used this question to basically springboard his kind of life story. And he was just so captivating, and he was able to like focus on certain things that he knew the audience would really like, and it was just really entrancing. And I think it's such a good skill to be able to have, but I think it is very difficult because naturally you're dealing with something a lot more complex, a lot more detail, and it's a lot longer, so you're going to have to almost prepare it. But yeah, it's a really good skill.
Yep.
So, methods to preserve and enhance surprise in your story. 4 ways to increase the surprise of your story. Number 1, don't start with the main point. Steer clear of summarizing or stating the main point at the beginning of your story. Number 2, make the surprise stand out. Make the surprising part of your story really different from what came before it to make it more impactful. Number 3, leverage stakes. Use those stakes to deepen the audience's investment in the story, enhancing the effect of the surprise. Number 4, conceal key details strategically. So planting bombs. This involves mixing crucial details in with other less important information, positioning these details as far from the surprise moment as possible, and if feasible, surround these key details with humor to disguise their significance. By following these strategies, a storyteller can effectively create a narrative that captivates the audience through unexpected twists and turns. And I think, seems very straightforward. It makes a lot of sense. I think the surprise element is quite a big component in a lot of stories, especially if they're like slightly comedic. So yeah, the more you can kind of, obscure it with other details.
Yeah. I think adding an element of surprise every now and again also can throw people off the scent a little bit with stories, which keeps them more likely to want to read on. It reminds me a bit of like the oh my god, what is it called in the behavioral science, like the Pavlov dog, the variable rewards? Is that the one? Like where
Potentially.
it's I think it's called, so it's like not when you press a button and you get a reward. It's like when you press a button and sometimes you get a reward. It's basically why gamblers get addicted. Basically,
Okay, yeah.
I'm saying it's called kind of like the same mechanism. Like if you continuously, obviously, keep meeting the expectations of the people who are coming, and there are no surprises, and people can guess what's going to happen, fine, they might be interested in the story. Almost. But if you throw them off the scent a little bit every now and again, and you give them these things that a bit like with the Game of Thrones, where you just kill off a main character, they're a bit like, oh god, and then all of a sudden it's like they think they know what's happening, but they're not confident on it, which is good because you want them to be like that, because then they want to know what the ending is. Whereas there's some films like we know that you could just watch from the beginning and be like, right, we know, for example, Jason Statham, he's going to kill every bad guy. It's not even going to be a fair fight, and it's good. It is like easy watching, but there's nothing there that's going to like catch you off guard and give you a bit more. So that's I was just thinking of that. I thought it's like you give people or you give them like a thing which they think they're going to get rewarded and they don't, and then they just want more because of that.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. No.
Exactly. I'm butchering the
almost
name.
Like reward prediction error.
Yeah, it is. It is that, but there's like a word for it with the gambling. Oh, I'm really blank on it.
Yeah.
I want to say
I know what you're talking about. I just don't know the word to describe it. Maybe it is variable reward.
I think it could be. Yeah.
So that was part 2, crafting your story. Let's reflect on what we covered. So we covered that every story has 5-second moments, how to find the start of your story, the importance of stakes as well as techniques to increase the stakes in a story, the 5 permissible lies of true storytelling. We also covered why every moment in your story needs a location. On top of that, the principles of but and therefore to generate change in a story. Also, the power of negative character descriptions, why big stories are hard stories, the importance of surprise in storytelling, and finally, followed by methods to preserve and enhance surprise in your story. So now that we have crafted our story, it's time to tell it. So part 3, telling your story.
So the beginning on part 3, he talks about using the present tense. So using the present tense in a story makes it feel like it's happening right now, no matter where the audience is, like in bed, next to a fire, or in a bath. It's like a magic trick that brings the story to life in the moment. This tense brings the audience closer to the action, almost like they're time traveling to be part of the story as it unfolds. The present tense also makes the story more real and intense for both the person telling the story and the ones listening. For storytellers who can picture their stories in their heads, using the present tense helps them feel like they're going through these events again. This means they can tell the story in a more lively and interesting way because they're not just talking to the audience, they're experiencing the story again themselves. And that also does make sense, like, not using the passive, not using third. I mean, you could be using third person, I guess, when you're telling a story, but the ability to make it sound like it's happening right now is obviously going to get people way more engaged than speaking in like a passive tone.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I think the closest someone can get to understanding what you've experienced is by being someone there that experienced it with you. That's the closest. And even then, it's not an identical replication, right? Because if I tell you about the most beautiful sunset I've ever seen and I can describe it, the thing is that you're only going to picture those words, or the thing that you're going to picture is only through your associations to a sunset, right? Like the sunsets that you've
Yes.
seen. It will never be the sunset that I saw. And so stories are almost trying to, the aim of stories is almost trying to get as close as you can to transferring that experience to someone else. And I think by using, like we've talked about, kind of descriptive words, but in this case, also using first person language, I think allows that person to empathetically kind of understand where we're coming from and almost embody, like take the very like point of view from you as if they're wearing your eyes, you know.
Yeah,
um
yeah.
I think a lot of this is like tapping into that. It's like, how can I enhance the story to make it even easier for you to try and understand what I experience?
Yeah, I do think that then the present tense, as well as very good use of adjectives and descriptions, would be the best way to
Mm.
go about that, I can imagine. Especially for ones where you need to really paint the picture, like a sunset.
So, how to tell success stories. So, when it comes to narrating stories of success, it's advisable to adopt 3 specific approaches. Number 1, self-deprecation. Rather than glorifying yourself or your achievement, aim to downplay both. This helps to maintain relatability and humility in your storytelling. And number 2, focus on incremental progress. Instead of emphasizing the grandeur of the success, highlight the smaller incremental steps that led to it. This makes the story more realistic and relatable, as more achievements are the result of numerous small efforts rather than sudden leaps. And finally, number 3, highlight unexpected victories. Remember, people inherently root for the underdog. The universal appeal of the underdog story lies in its potential for unexpected victories. Once again, that kind of unexpectedness, the surprise,
Yeah.
um, which are far more satisfying than predictable outcomes. A triumph against the odds resonates more powerfully than the foreseen success. And I quite like that actually, because I think it is very easy to kind of slip into this like almost gloating
Mm.
kind of story whenever you're trying to tell something, tell someone about a success of yours. And I think either people do that, or they shy away from telling those stories that, you know, might be like a very good accomplishment purely because they don't want to sound like they're gloating. um I know, like, I do that. I don't really open up about achievements or things like that because I don't want to come across as if I'm like boasting about it. But
Mm.
there is a time and a place when you can say it. It's just, I think taking these points into consideration is actually quite important.
Yeah, I especially like the incremental progress. Not being like, oh, it was a
Mm.
masterstroke by myself. No, it was like, it kind of reminds you when like successful entrepreneurs always kind of try and play into that trope of like hard work and stuff. In some sense, to try and give humility, also inspiration, but also at the same time to try and not boast about it. Like, oh, I may have achieved this, but it's because I worked really hard. And then I do like the unexpected victories a lot. I think if you come across as like, oh yeah, I was destined for greatness, people will think you're just crazy, right? Whereas like, oh, I worked really hard and I got lucky, and I wasn't expecting this, and it just blew up, and is amazing, but that's like the nature of it. You just be a bit like, I respect that person more than somebody who doesn't have the humility to realize sometimes things are outside of their control. And hiding, I mean, most people, even if they did achieve some like form of success or whatever, they can't plan for it exactly right. There's just so many factors. So there's millions of people who plan for that level of success. There's only a few that get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe there's another point where you could sometimes mention it was like a collaborative project or a
Oh, yeah, sure,
collaborative
yeah.
effort, you know, tie in the other people if the other people happen to contribute to it.
Sure, I'm surprised you didn't mention that.
Yeah.
That's a big one in my head. Like, it wasn't just me,
Yeah.
team effort. Yeah.
Yeah. So it can be tempting to share every detail of hard-earned success. To be the unblemished hero of your story. However, remembering that there's a fine line between being a hero and being perceived as self-important. Exercise caution and aim for more modest and approachable narrative.
Yeah, I was going to just add to that point about, being a hero and stuff. Like, if you really look at kind of what the hero cliche and trope kind of is, it definitely isn't somebody who's arrogant and egotistical, is it really? They're usually humble, and so you almost like these feed into that hero trope even more. So like by trying to be a hero too hard, you almost do the opposite. If you, do you know what I mean? If you try and position
Well,
yourself
it's
as a hero,
yeah,
you almost position yourself as the non-hero because everybody knows the hero kind of reluctantly does his role. If that makes sense. Like in stories where the hero is the actual hero, they do it in like a modest and like humble way, don't they? They're not like, I'm the best, I save the world afterwards kind of thing, are they? Ever. So it's kind of like by being or trying to make yourself out to be a hero, you almost make yourself not a hero by the same reasoning.
yeah. It's funny that because you almost get and you can get this a lot where the hero is the arrogant, person, but they are not the hero yet because the change or the moral or the thing that he has to overcome is realizing he can't be like arrogant and
Yes.
have
Yeah.
some god
100%
complex.
that's the character change, isn't it?
You know?
Yeah. It's the
Yeah. So
humility that's just like come about because of like like an experience in the movie or whatever. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely.
And that's actually a very common one. Actually, that's a very common movie sort of character arc, isn't it? Like the humbling.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I think it's mainly because it's probably a very human experience in life. We all get humbled in many different ways, don't we? Just these ones tend to be
Well,
like greater and more dramatic.
yeah, and it's also an interesting like. I think it's quite inherent in us to bring people back down to earth.
Yeah.
I know you've talked about it numerous times in like the celebrity culture. We like to bring celebrities back down to earth.
Yeah.
And I know that it's present in multiple different like kind of um tribes, and where that's like a common trait, whereas like okay, you might have caught a for instance, I know that there's one, I can't remember what tribe it was in, but they were talking about how, let's say you went out and you killed the meat for dinner, you
Hmm.
don't get praised for it. You
Okay.
don't, like, it's almost like pride is a sin in that sense, and so you get brought back down to earth, and everyone is just equal. And I think we kind of do the same, almost like old stories, with heroes. We're almost doing the same. It's like you have this ability. There's no one is saying you're not powerful, and not you're not powerful and you're not able to do this stuff. But it's like you have to learn to be brought down a peg and
Yeah.
act, regardless of how much power you have, act on the same equal playing field as everyone else,
Yeah.
and be
It's very
humble.
Peterson-esque, isn't it? That sort of idea in my head.
Because
Um,
otherwise it
yeah.
goes to your head.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, especially if you surround yourself with people who feed that. A bit like the Meat Canyon episode of Logan Paul.
Yes. Yeah.
That's a very
Yeah.
like dramatic representation of it. But technically, I like the reason why it's so funny is because it's literally kind of what it is, but it's just put in a way that's so like gross. You're like, oh my god.
Yeah.
But like the reality is that is the kind of underlying like what's the word, like relation, like parasocial relationship between these type of people. Like I'm on the payroll, so I'm basically to some extent, I was gonna say you're the bitch. Like you can't really speak up to be honest, and that's the
Yeah.
problem with it to some extent. Especially if the person, if like you just said there, they built themselves up to be a hero and believe they're a narrative. To bring them down, it's just such a awakening call that they only surround themselves with people who tell them yes. Basically, you can imagine how easy that would be
Mm.
to slip into. To be fair,
Very easy.
Because a lot of
And
people
I
tell
think
you,
that
and
is a
you build up
constant
your reality
battle.
by social. Like, you build up your reality by what people tell you. To be honest, to some degree, is real. Like the example would be if people, all your close friends, started calling you crazy, be like, "Oh my god, you actually crazy!" Like, and they kept doing it, like gaslighting you. Eventually, you would, you start doubting yourself, right? So, like the ability for people to be like, "Oh my god, you're the best, you're the best, you're the best," and you just see it again and again and again everywhere. You can't you can't not end up believing some form of that, and then you start obviously treating people like shit because you believe you are superior. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I think it's quite a journey that you have to go on, probably for, I don't know, it depends what trait you're talking about and which someone is competent at or, has excelled at. But yeah, I think that is like an internal journey that people have to constantly like go on and
check themselves, I guess.
constantly walking that kind of tightrope between the two.
Yeah, no, 100%. Well, it depends, I guess, on who it is. Everybody excels in certain things, right? That's the what I was thinking about this
Yeah.
actually really randomly earlier. I was like, I don't know what I was thinking about. I was thinking about, being average, let's just say, and then being exceptional. And I was thinking like, but most people are technically, that like, there's first of all, there's no such thing as average. And then it's like, everybody's exceptional in certain things. Like you can be
Mm.
exceptional at certain things. Maybe they're not good things, but you can still be exceptional at it, right? Like, because if you're on the far end of the barbell, you're going to be exceptional at something, right? And I was just thinking, yeah, we're all exceptional in certain ways. And then it's, I guess, with the people who are really exceptional at certain things that are valued in society, how do you make sure they don't run rampant and develop massive egos because that just because that one skill they seem to have at the moment is the one that's valued the most in society. Um,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah, weird.
absolutely.
One of those poo thoughts, you know.
Yeah.
Okay, and we'll finish this off right. So the very last part of the telling your story, and this has come across in all of these communication books we've done, which is don't memorize. So don't memorize your stories. So avoid memorizing your story verbatim. Unlike actors who need to remember their lines and have the support of their cast to assist with forgotten dialogue, your role as a storyteller is different. Actors portray characters, but you are sharing your own experiences. Authenticity and vulnerability are key in storytelling, and these can be compromised when you're reciting from memory. Instead, focus on memorizing three key elements of your story. Number one, the opening sentences. Begin with impact. A strong start sets the tone. Two, the concluding sentences. End memorably. Your conclusion should leave a lasting impression. And number three is the key scenes. So you need to remember the essential scenes of your story. And if you lose track of the exact wording, knowing the scenes ensures you can still narrate effectively. And this is pretty much, I mean, obviously, apart from the opening and concluding, the idea of key scenes is reflected in the art of explanation with the bullet points of your points that you
Mm.
want to say, and the same with think faster, talk smarter. Having bullet points to remind yourself of what you want to say. So by memorizing these crucial parts, you maintain the structure and flow of your story without sacrificing the natural and spontaneous delivery that makes storytelling so engaging. Yeah, and once again, it's repeating what we've seen across all these communication books, and it's the idea of not scripting everything. And even if you did script stuff, adding elements which allow you to talk more naturally.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that was it. We have finished part three, which is telling your story. So let's reflect on the last part. So we've covered the importance of using the present tense, how to tell success stories should you need, and why it's important to avoid memorizing your stories. And that's the book. I mean, I think it's a nice little addition to the communication
Yeah.
books we've been recently doing. I'm hoping off the back of this now, because we've established across all these books that one of the key things you need to do is create a story stockpile or a bunch of stories from your life that you're going to have available to you to whip out at any point. And this book, in my head, especially the first part, would help you generate these stories. Then go through the second part to craft the stories using stakes, etc. And in the third part, obviously telling. I think, to be honest, it's probably the least important, but you can just practice telling with other, like with friends, etc. Each time you tell your story,
Mm.
you're probably going to get better at telling it. But I think from this book, you definitely can have the tools and tricks to build that stockpile in the first place. And to be honest, I need to get onto it myself because I really like this idea, and I think it can, it can really benefit you if you want to, especially if you want to be persuasive and you want to convince people. Maybe like, even at the end, success stories, or you want to talk about your success in a way that's less in your face or whatever, or you want to talk about a story that maybe signifies. In fact, a good example could be something like maybe a story that signifies a certain character trait you have for an interview or whatnot. This would be the place to look for. Like, what was the first time you acted courageous? Well, what was the worst time you were courageous or whatever because you got punched in the face? So you can do all these things with that as well.
Yes, no, absolutely. I really, really want to get into writing down stories, and I quite, I quite like that idea of just what was the story of today, and there might be multiple, but the fact is that you just get into the habit of starting to write them down, and I think more than anything, this will just start to teach kind of mentality towards one being able to being comfortable with telling stories, also like being valuing, entertaining people. And I think it will also, if you go down this journey where you start telling stories and everything, you'll also pick up on other people when they tell stories. And you'll probably be more attuned to picking up certain like things that they do that you're like, I really like that. I want to start kind of implementing that into how I start to, tell stories. And I think that goes almost beyond stories as well, because you're starting to engage with more people, right? And you're
And more
starting to
conversations and more of your
appreciate.
life. Yeah.
Exactly. So you're starting to pick up on things that you might not have before because you didn't attribute maybe as much value to it. But you'll start to be like, oh, okay, I quite like having conversations like this because I can start to see all these things that I actually quite am interested in.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. So that was, Storyworthy. So now we've got the story stockpile. We've got the way to make the story stockpile. So I think that will conclude for storytelling for now. I believe next thing we're going to do is probably how to have impossible conversations or speak like Churchill and stand like Lincoln. So yeah.
That's a wrap. Beautiful. That is a wrap.